Yes. It's so good to see you over there. Listen, we are in for a treat as Nkechi Taifa joins us as our opening speaker for this historic event. When we first spoke and I was talking to her about joining us, I felt like I already knew her. I had heard so much about her, and people always said, "You sure you don't know her? You sure you guys haven't met?" But now we have met, and we will forever be connected. Y'all know how I am, those of you who know me. So I am so excited, and I'm honored to introduce our opening speaker for our women's conference. Nkechi is the principal and CEO of the Taifa Group, LLC, which is a social enterprise firm whose mission is to advance justice. Her group's portfolio of client services include coalition building, convenings, government relations, meetings, retreat facilitation, strategic planning, and trainings. She convenes the Justice Roundtable, a broad network of advocacy groups advancing progressive justice system reforms, and serves as a senior fellow at the Center for Justice at Columbia University. She's also served as the advocacy director for criminal justice for Open Society Foundations and Open Society Policy Center from 2002 to 2018. As I'm sure you can imagine and you saw from her profile, I could go on and on and on, but I will not take up any more of her time. I want you to hear her voice. I want you to feel her spirit. And I am looking forward to everything that she has to say to kick off our conference. Welcome and thank you. And I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so very much, Lori James Towns, for the opportunity to share just a few words as the opening speaker at this auspicious convening. I'm looking down here, 482, 483. It keeps going on and on. I mean, I'm just really thrilled. You know, the convening, this emphasizes that we don't need to look any further. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. We are the ones that we have been waiting for. My sisters, my heroines, ever so often, a moment occurs and a window of opportunity opens. Ever so often, a glimmer of hope sparks and the faint possibility of change appears on the horizon. That moment occurred in 1955 when Rosa Parks sat down on that bus and helped to bring about a chain of events which dismantled the system of Jim Crow. That window opened in 1991 when a videotape exposed the attack on Rodney King and a spotlight was shown on police abuse in the United States. And that possibility is making itself manifest right here, right now, today in 2020, when a white police officer kneeled on the neck of a Black man for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, snuffing out the last breath from his body. And it is that incident that thrust us headstrong into the moment that we find ourselves in today, with a window of opportunity thrust open and the possibility of change in our criminal and juvenile justice systems, the nature of which we have never seen before. Stop killer cops. Defund the police. Reparations now. Free them all. What do we want? Justice. When do we want it? Now. When do we want justice? When do we want it? Now. When I say freedom, you say now. Freedom now. Freedom now. When I say freedom, you say now. Freedom now. Freedom now. Nostalgic, y'all. That takes me back in the day. And it's just so very thrilling to see the young people of today doing these chants, doing these slogans. But let me be perfectly clear. Despite living in a time of adversity, despite living in a time of hostility, despite living in a time of turmoil, we have today the unprecedented opportunity to undertake a comprehensive re-examination of systems in general and of our deteriorated criminal and juvenile systems in particular. And I know we're going to have speakers Brianna Belger, Catherine Jones, and Laura Berry, who are going to talk to us later on. We don't need any more super predator language. These are our youth. Language matters. They are not super predators. We're talking about an opportunity that we have now to examine the system of enslavement, which, as Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative tells us, did not end in 1865, but it evolved into a legacy that can be seen in the presumption of guilt and dangerousness assigned to Black folk, which has led to mass incarceration. An examination of the system, where nearly half of the total US prison and jail population of over 2 million people is African American. An examination of the system, where there are more than 200,000 women, sisters, women behind bars, more than 1 million on probation and parole. An examination of the system wherein youth of color are overrepresented at every single stage, with Black children 3 times more likely to be suspended, expelled, and arrested than white children. We're talking about an examination of a system where 80% of the girls and nearly half of all children sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole have been physically abused. With 77% of girls and 20% of all youth lifers revealing that they have been sexually abused. We need to examine the system, which has zero tolerance policies and suspends children for infractions such as talking back to teachers, such as truancy, such as horseplay, uniform violations, or other disobedient or uncooperative behavior. We need to examine a system wherein the increase in the prison population has not been evidence of rising crime, not in evidence of more criminal activity by African Americans, but a reflection of more sentencing stringent policies. An examination of the system that disregards the crisis of COVID-19 in prisons, jails, and other carceral settings where Blacks are disproportionately incarcerated, resulting in over 100,000 people in carceral settings now having contracted the virus, and at least 800 incarcerated individuals and correctional staff have died as a result. An examination of the system that results in Black folk, whether incarcerated or not, dying disproportionately from the coronavirus due to pre-existing chronic illnesses with roots to the enslavement era and its genocidal aftermath, the result of epigenetic damage that has traveled through our DNA throughout the centuries. And let's not forget the impact on our mental health, as we will hear later from Dr. Cynthia Young and Pamela Love Manning, the trauma that she will talk about that we still experience. And back to yesterday, an examination of the system that allowed 15% of the Black population of the little Texas town of Tulia to be arrested, to be convicted, to be imprisoned on drug trafficking charges based on the sole uncorroborated testimony of one lone white undercover officer whose modus operandi was to record purported drug buys on his arms and on his legs. Trying to stick my leg up there. That's what he did. That's some joogie boogie. And speaking of drugs, nothing has contributed more to mass incarceration of men and women of color, and who are today now subject to the double whammy of incarceration during a health pandemic. Nothing more has contributed to it than the war on drugs. Is this ranting and raving? Absolutely not. A police supervisor back in the day once stated that there's as much cocaine in the Sears Tower in the stock exchange as there is in the Black community. But he said those guys are harder to catch. Those deals are done up in the office buildings in somebody's home. But the guy standing on the corner, he's almost got a sign on his back. Those guys are just arrestable. So what happened? Back in the day before the turn of the century, I was a public defender. Then I was a staff attorney, a policy analyst. And at that time, instead of deploying officers in long-term arrest of suppliers that after 3 months may only result in the arrest of Charlie and Harry, the decision was made to deploy these same officers to the Black community, to young Tyrone, who was standing on the corner and made 200 arrests. Despite the fact that arresting those 2 guys in the suburbs may have shut down 5 or 6 crack houses, what did the police and politicians tell me? They said that they were responding Lori James Towns, to my elderly neighbor, Miss Pearl, who lived on the corner where I used to live. Indeed, there are Miss Pearls all over. They're peeping out their curtains, out their windows, watching any and everything that's going on. They may be our aunties and our nanas. They might just be many of us. And the police say that they come to our communities and militarize full force because Miss Pearl will call them. And that is what she expected. They say that she wanted them to immediately make those 200 arrests in her community. They say that she didn't want to hear about any 2-month investigation. And so I pondered, why did Miss Pearl not want to hear about that? Is it because the correct message had not reached her? Is it because she had been inundated and captivated by erroneous media depictions? And because the media did not focus on it, she didn't know that those 2 arrests would have shut down the crack houses in her community. Miss Pearl did not connect the dots between the overinvestment in police resources and the underinvestment of resources in her community. She never was given the opportunity. There was never an option of visualizing just what public safety could look like with mass utilization of the concept of restorative justice. You see, Miss Pearl and so many of us at the time did not understand just what a mandatory minimum sentence was, that it didn't matter if college student Kimber Smith got caught up with the wrong guy and he beat her and threatened her and her family so bad that she was scared to come forward about his drug dealing. It didn't matter that she's pregnant when she's thrown in prison. It didn't matter that she never used or handled any drugs. Ilham Askia, it doesn't matter that she may have had inadequate legal counsel. The mandatory minimum drug law said that she had to serve time, 24 and a half years of it. There are no mitigating or extenuating circumstances when it comes to mandatory minimum sentences, that is, except the dangerous option of snitching. And I know y'all with me because we all work here in the area of public defense. But back in the day, Miss Pearl didn't understand what the infamous 100-to-1 ratio meant, that the boys in the hood who were convicted of selling 5 grams of crack cocaine, the weight of a couple of packs of sugar worth perhaps $125, received a mandatory prison term of 5 years, whereas it took 500 grams of powder cocaine worth nearly $50,000 to receive that same 5-year sentence. She didn't know that nearly 1/3 of all federal crack cocaine cases involved an average weight of just 52 grams. And actually, I'm wrong. That one, I think it's near 2/3 of all federal crack cocaine cases involved an average weight of 52 grams, the weight of an ordinary candy bar. She didn't know that young Tyrone was not a major drug kingpin, that the federal government had no business in his prosecution, and that there was a prison bed waiting for him based on his test scores from the 3rd grade. Oh yeah, we are living in adverse times. And guess what? Ms. Pearl never even stopped to think of the adverse impact on political empowerment in the Black community as a result of 250,000 African-American men being disenfranchised as a result of their felony conviction, stripped of the right to vote. Indeed, she didn't realize that every single social issue was impacted, exacerbated, and or magnified once one is released from prison. Ms. Pearl was ignorant of the termination of parental rights under the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997, the loss of school loans under the 1998 amendments to the Higher Education Act. She didn't know that her grandson could have been kicked, her grandson could have her kicked out of her public housing as a result of his drug conviction, that her daughter could be denied public assistance or her son unable to find employment because of the infamous box. Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Andrea Lyon, indeed, it never dawned upon Ms. Pearl that a young Black woman could be sent to Harvard for the cost of what society pays for her incarceration. Now, Ms. Pearl knew about the 13th Amendment to the Constitution abolishing slavery, but she was unaware of the prison slavery exception clause. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist except as punishment for a crime. Ms. Pearl didn't know that the more people sent to prison, the more profit there was to be made. My sisters, are you with me? Meredith Moore is going to speak today about creating our financial power. I'm waiting for that one. You need some financial power, but consider this. We have a situation wherein there are economic and financial interests in keeping sentences harsh and long so that prison populations continue to soar. You see, from a management point of view, a prison can be characterized like a hotel or a motel. You want to fill every bed every night. And if you don't have enough guests, you do whatever you can to get them, including supporting campaigns for mandatory and longer sentences. We're living in some hostile times. So it's not surprising that we see the advent of more and more punitive criminal punishment laws, which has caused the rate of incarceration of Black folk to astronomically rise. And although the laws today are facially neutral and do not intentionally discriminate, disparate treatment is often ingrained within the fabric of social institutions, allowing discrimination to occur without the need for action by a specific person. You see, today's racism in some ways, today's racism is subtle and structurally embedded in many police departments, prosecutor officers, and courtrooms. It's found in laws and policies that look fair, but nevertheless have a racially discriminatory impact. The long-range implications of what is increasingly becoming the criminalization of a race are shuddering. Mass incarceration with lengthy sentences invariably results in the disruption, disintegration of families, the destabilization of communities, and diminished life prospects, measures which combine to incarcerate generations. Any consideration of the impact of mass incarceration that fails to take into account the role of institutionalized racism is an insufficient analysis, and any remedy that does not acknowledge the understanding that racism manifests itself in various forms is deficient. And most egregiously, Ms. Pearl did not realize that year after year, decade after decade, century after century, although the players change and the scene shifts, the script irrefutably remains the same: unequal justice. It doesn't matter whether the issue of vigilantism or police brutality or prosecutorial abuse or unjust sentencing. As a race, Black folk have been subjected to a double standard of justice: hostile times, adversity. The names, the groups, the events spanning the decades are legion: the Scottsboro Boys, Emmett Till, Black Panther Party, the Attica Rebellion, Eleanor Bumpers, Michael Stewart, Amadou Diallo, Abner Louima, Johnny Garrett, Sean Bell, Jenna Six, Troy Davis, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Aiyana Jones, Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. The list. Make sure blood boil. The list is endless. Shout their names. You see, Miss Pearl thought what was happening with the police was justice, where in actuality it was just us. It is past time that we confront the disastrous policies of the past half century. Today, there are over 2 million people behind bars. This country's mammoth experiment in mass incarceration has been an abysmal failure, producing conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of a race. Kudos to Michelle Alexander, kudos, for popularizing the analogy of today's system of mass incarceration with earlier systems of social control, such as Jim Crow. Yes, we are talking about the institutionalization of second-class citizenship once one is released from imprisonment. Yes, we are talking about disparate treatment and profiling, arrest and sentencing, but we may also be talking about the possible extermination of generations as well. My sisters, although enlightening, we must not get too comfortable with Alexander's Jim Crow analogy to mass incarceration, as I submit it just may be too limiting. I say we must push the envelope even further to illuminate the severity of the problem facing Black communities. You see, I coined the phrase institutionalized genocide as a framework through which to analyze the evolving jurisprudence of international human rights doctrine to selected conditions impacting Black people in the United States. Institutionalized genocide. The terminology is neither ranting nor rank rhetoric. Rather, it methodically uses the international and US definition of genocide as a lens to scrutinize today's criminal punishment system and its impact on the Black community. The definition of genocide is killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting upon the group conditions of life calculated to bring about their destruction in whole or in part, taking measures to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children from one group to another. That is the definition. And it goes on to say that those who are guilty of genocide shall be punished, regardless of whether they are constitutionally responsible rulers, public officials, or private citizens. And it goes on to say that genocide is not the only actionable act. Conspiracy to commit genocide, direct and public incitement to commit genocide, attempt to commit genocide, and complicity in its commission. Hey, we need to start looking at some of this, y'all. This is the only human rights treaty that is self-executing, meaning it's actionable in U.S. law without the need for other implementing legislation. Committee Against Torture, Civil and Human Rights, all of that. There's limitations. For genocide, you can go right into court today. Okay, I'm just saying. So I feel that the heightened nomenclature of genocide should shock the public into sparking a real revolution in criminal legal system policies and practices, as opposed to settling into yet another shift in focus to a still newer form of social control. And perhaps we just may need to push the envelope a bit further and ask, can the United States government abide by the mandates that a global framework to justice issues presents? Or are we once again relegated to Dred Scott justice, where the human rights of African descendant people are not bound to be respected? Unfortunately, my elderly neighbor, Miss Pearl, passed before I could tell her about my work in the successful passage of the 2008 Second Chance Reentry legislation. She passed before I could tell her that the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010 that I had been working on for 17 years before that had finally become law, which reduced the 100-to-1 ratio between crack and powder cocaine. Miss Pearl didn't get a whiff of the winds of change that were on the horizon after the turn of the century. She didn't know that the narrative on crime was shifting and that criminal justice reform was not necessarily the lightning rod that it was decades earlier. She missed the 2012 Supreme Court ruling in Miller, which held that mandatory life without parole sentences for children violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Ms. Pearl didn't get to hear that former Attorney General Holder's smart and crime policies focus on federal prosecutions on large-scale traffickers as opposed to bit players. Cynthia Rosemary, Ms. Pearl didn't know about the Executive Clemency Initiative to provide relief for those serving inordinately lengthy mandatory minimum sentences. And she wasn't around for the 2018 bipartisan passage of the First Step Act. But although Ms. Pearl did not witness the dawning of this new day and is unable to help shape the exciting new narrative you and I are and we can, we are now at a point where we can openly discuss the data we have known for years, that sending people to prison and keeping them there for unconscionably lengthy periods of time does not make us or Ms. Pearl any safer, does not deter future crime, does not promote successful reintegration back to our communities. There is now mass appeal for the need to find better, more creative, and more cost-effective ways to push that envelope to achieve change. And it is time that we raise the ante and have the audacity to advance creative solutions. The Miss Pearls of our community, they are crying out for all of us to take our rightful place in continuing the struggle. So we are now near the end of the Trump presidency. I gotta repeat that, y'all. We are now near the end of the Trump presidency. We survived the slave ships and the cotton fields and the cane plantations and the tobacco farms and the dogs and the water hoses, and we survived Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions and the rest of them. Why? Because my sisters, my heroines, because we are a resilient people. We are confronting the disastrous policies of the past 400 years. We are protesters in the streets. We are raising hell in the streets. We are resilient during these times of adversity. We are understanding the importance of taking care of ourselves, Anana Harris Perry, because surely if we are on the front lines and don't survive, we can be of no service to others. And we must turn our outrage into action. It is time that we, as attorneys, advocates, activists, social workers, investigators, service providers, case managers, experts, paralegals, law students, formerly incarcerated people, policymakers, judges, church folks, scholars, and plain old community folk. It is time again that we raise the ante and have the audacity to advance creatively strategic solutions as we have done in the past, and to fashion new systems of justice and safety based on prevention rather than punishment, and compassion rather than criminalization. We are the ones we have been waiting for. And thank you, Lisa Wayne and Heather Pinckney, who we will hear from later. We definitely must lead and empower the next generation. The 2008 Second Chance Reentry legislation, resiliency. The 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, resiliency. Attorney General Holder's smart on crime policies, resiliency. The Obama administration's clemency initiative, resiliency. Measures to ban the box on employment applications, resiliency. These are reforms that Ms. Pearl never would have dreamed of and would have been unthinkable a decade ago. But it is our resiliency that brought about a new day and a new narrative being formed. Black Lives Matter, resiliency. National Mamas Bailout Days, resiliency. Mass protests in the streets demanding change, resiliency. Frederick Douglass once stated that power concedes nothing without a demand, and we are demanding no more drug war. We are demanding no more felony disenfranchisement. Are y'all with me? We are demanding no more juvenile life without parole. We are demanding no more incarceration of women, no more school to prison pipeline, no more warehousing generations. And there are voices now demanding defund the police and reinvest in communities. But who is going to break it all down? To the Miss Pearls of our communities. Yes, my heroines, the Miss Pearls of our communities, they are crying out for you. They need your mentorship, your guidance, your prayers, your solutions. They are sitting right next to us in our pews. They are kneeling with us on our prayer rugs. They are peering through the Venetian blinds of their windows, watching the police terrorize their communities. Miss Pearl and Mr. Bobby and little Tyrone and Tynesha, they're waiting for your leadership, ladies, women of public defense, your courage. They need your vision, your faith. I know it ain't easy, y'all. We all get tired. Lord have mercy, I most certainly do. But when I'm tired, I think about what my heroine, Harriet Tubman, did for a living, and I become resilient. Though Harriet was small, her mission was tall. She had to be brave to set free the slaves. Harriet was strong. She never went wrong. Though Harriet was wanted, dead or alive, she kept on pushing. She took no job. Harriet was strong. She never went wrong. She trudged back south 19 times to lead 300 north. They waded through the streams and they scaled the high mountains, but they never, ever, ever stopped going forward. They followed the moss on the side of the trees, for they knew it led north. It was nature's key. They followed the North Star, for it was a guide. By moon they would travel, by sun they would hide. The art of escape was a dangerous one as they traveled in disguise. By boat, by wagon, by foot, by carriage, she found no one would take us back to enslavement alive. Woo! Wasn't that awesome, y'all? I wrote that 40 years ago. Yeah, but can you imagine, Lori? Can you imagine what type of leader Harriet Tubman would have made in these hostile days today? Someone who was consistent, persistent, against all odds, someone who did not just think of herself, but reached back time after time again to help others. To Pennsylvania and New York, she brought the slaves to these states were safe no more. Then all the way to Kennedy's trudge where her people would be slaves no more. She could not read, nor could she write, but thousands of times she outwitted the whites. Resiliency in a time of adversity. Another one of my heroines, courageous, powerful. Her name was Fannie Lou Hamer, born in 1917. Grandma had been a slave and the times were still mean. The state was Mississippi. Woolville was the place where Black sharecropped the land for another people's race. Now the owner of this land was a farmer who was slick as he devised a sneaky scheme when Fannie Lou was 6, promising her wherever she wanted from his store, she had to pick 30 pounds of cotton or more. Though he gave her what he promised, that sly, slick day, he now knew that she could work. Gone were childhood days of play. So as a little girl, she labored picking cotton for the whites, from can't see in the morning till can't see at night. So what happened? The civil rights folk came down to the South and said, you have the right to vote, y'all. But you know what Fannie Lou Hamer went through just trying to exercise that right, not only for herself, but for others as well? But for working to help others pass that voting test, she was detained, questioned, and placed under arrest. Beaten till her body was battered and told that she would die. The kicks left her kidney injured and a blood clot in her eye. Because of being harassed, threatened, and from her job fired, Fannie Lou often said she was just sick and tired of being sick and tired. But never did she give up that little light of hope, but kept right on registering Black folk to vote. Fannie Lou Hamer would turn over in her grave as she knew about Trump's executive order creating a sham commission on voter fraud. Today's keynote speaker, Stacey Abrams, knows all about voter suppression. Oh yes, where was such a commission when Fannie Lou was being beaten to an inch of her life because she dared to register Black folk to vote? Where was such a commission when Medgar Evers was murdered in his own driveway because he dared to register people to vote? Where was such a commission to combat grandfather clauses, voter tests, and other nonsensical laws that fraudulently suppress the Black vote? If there ever was a time, my sisters, when our vote mattered, the time is now. I don't care if we hold our nose while casting our ballots. Vote. I don't care if Kamala Harris used to be a prosecutor. Vote. I don't care if Biden vote the damn 1994 crime bill because we are already in the process of dismantling it. Vote. Vote. Vote while we still have the constitutional right, because this country is on a slippery slope towards police state fascism. But my inspiration for boldness of action, to not be afraid to go against the status quo, our collective heroine, Sister Rosa Parks, strong and bold, standing by the bus stop. Quiet and bold, along came the bus with its Jim Crow laws, which seemed like a prison with invisible bars. Sister Rosa Parks, strong and bold, sat calm and determined like an ancient queen of gold. When the bus driver came and demanded her seat, she refused to get up. She had poor, tired feet. Look here, gal, don't you know the laws of this land? Blacks got to get up for every white man. I refused to give up my seat. I paid my fare like all on this bus. I remain strong if you beat me. I remain strong because I must. Police, police, arrest this woman now. Throw her in the jail. She's a threat to this town. Rosa looked around and thought it just isn't fair. But the people acted like they didn't even care. But there were folk in the community who were practicing Black unity. And at a big meeting that night, they discussed this bus plight. If Blacks stopped riding the buses, said a brother, the bus company will lose a lot of money, said another. A bus boycott sounds like a good way, said a sister. They sure don't need to get rich off our pay, said a mister. So they got Rosa Parks out of the Alabama jail and all had faith that their plan would not fail. Then no bus in Montgomery did Black people ride because it took away their African dignity and pride. Yeah, Rosa Parks went to jail, but there was a movement led by a minister, Dr. Martin Luther King, that not only got her out of jail, but put a set of circumstances in motion that changed the landscape of America. Resiliency. I've been a part of movements my entire life. The Black Power movement, the anti-apartheid movement, the movement to free political prisoners, the reparations movement, the movement against mass incarceration. This convening, Lori, could not have come at a more critical time. We are witnessing the dawning of a new movement. Nothing radical, but just one for Black lives to matter. We gotta connect the historical organizing dots of yesterday with the burgeoning movement today. We got to connect the organizing against a prison industrial complex where your profit is based on how many prisoners you can lock up. We got to connect the mobilization against the war on drugs, the organizing against the collateral consequences of a criminal conviction, the mobilization against police brutality, abuse, and lack of accountability. We need a comprehensive movement so that they will think twice before slapping a $2 million bounty on the head of Assata Shakur, a heroine who escaped on a modern day underground railroad. Heroines of the National Association of Public Defense, we are living in hostile times. And I'm not promising that the resiliency journey will be easy, but whenever times are hard or you feel stuck, remember the demand of my #1 great heroine, Harriet Tubman. She led over 300 people out of enslavement. She simply told her people to keep going. And I know we can't hear you because you are muted in webinar mode, but repeat the frame with me afterwards. And Laura, you take yourself off of mute, Laura, and you repeat it with me too. If you hear the dog, she demanded, keep going. Say, keep going.
Keep going.
If you see the torches in the woods,
keep going.
If they're shouting after you, keep going.
Keep going.
Don't ever stop, Harriet demanded. If you feel tired,
keep going.
If you want that taste of freedom, keep going.
Keep going.
Keep going. Keep going.
Keep going.
If you want some encouragement, keep going.
Keep going.
If you've ever been abused, keep going.
Keep going.
If you feel you've lost all hope,
keep going.
If you need some healing in your life, keep going.
Keep going.
If you need some self-care, keep going.
Keep going.
Don't stop. If you're in need of a miracle, hallelujah, keep going. If you want to be empowered, right
keep
on,
going.
keep going. If you want some justice and some peace, keep going. If you want to be resilient,
keep going.
Keep going. Keep going. We are the ones we have been waiting. We are not pretenders. We are defenders. We do not surrender. We are the avengers. When do we want justice? When do we want it? Now.
Now.
When do we want justice? When do we want it? Now.
Now. Girl.
So much fun. But as my closing, though, I just like to share just a 1-minute video. And I'm getting out the engineer to get it set up. Just a 1-minute video describing my soon-to-be released memoir. I just got the copy and the author, the proof copy in the mail today. Black Power, Black Lawyer, My Audacious Quest for Justice. And as the engineer prepares to put the video on the screen, please note that the official release date is September the 22nd, but you can register to pre-order it at my website, and I'll put it in the chat, www.blackpowerblacklawyer.com, and then inquire about the book wherever books are sold. Thank you. Let's hit it. Mine is the story of a quest really told, the search for the resistors and the rebellious, the pursuit of issues on the cutting edge. My memoir is both serious and scandalous. It's a juicy story of history, politics, law, culture, and yup, romance. It's part memoir, part textbook, part study guide, part expose. It teaches, preaches, rhapsodizes, and tantalizes. In it, I offer my truth, unapologetically and unfiltered, with honesty and fervor. Navigate this quest with me as I bear witness to ancestors, people, and episodes that swayed my consciousness. No matter which vantage point I found myself, from a teenager sitting on the lap of that fine brother pulling security in the front office of the Black Panther Party, to being a catalyst sparking the change to the infamous crack cocaine laws, my audacious quest for justice in society reigned supreme. I grew up as a Black Power advocate. I became a Black movement lawyer. I made good decisions and bad, with the challenges, personal frailties, and battle scars that define what it is to be human. My story is just as relevant now as it was during the turbulence of my youth. To today's generation, I show that you can challenge the dominant culture, remain true to your beliefs, have an African name, keep your hair in its natural state, and still kick ass.